Big U-turn. It's first Prime Minister's question time. I don't think I'm terribly surprised by it. Are you?
Unfortunately not, as you say. It's always easier for governments to dodge decisions on energy and avoid, confronting some of the activists and so on. There's a lot of hysteria, frankly, about fracking. As has been mentioned, we're already dependent on fracked gas in this country, and the rest of Europe is too. We're just importing it. Wouldn't it be better if we were producing some of it here with a lower carbon footprint and taxing it?
One of the key questions is how much natural gas we actually have to exploit. Do you have any clarity on that?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and the industry has said we're not going to know the answer to that unless we lift the moratorium, allow the industry to find out for itself. It may well be that our commercially viable reserves are quite low, but we won't know that if we don't actually do the test drilling and find out, and that's all the industry has been asking for.
But realistically, if we were to pursue fracking, how many years is it going to take before we get the benefits of the fracked gas?
Well, that's an interesting question. Potentially, it could be quite quick, but really we're talking about 12 to 18 months before we're seeing some gas production from a well, realistically. And to make a significant impact on the market, it would be a matter of years. But as has been mentioned before, we're going to be using gas for decades to come. 25 million buildings in this country use gas for their heating. It's used as an industrial feedstock, and it backs up intermittent renewables in power generation. So however hard that we push for decarbonisation and reducing gas consumption, we're going to be using it and importing it for a long time.
What is the answer to long-term energy security?
Well, it's not putting all your eggs in one basket. So it's having nuclear in the mix as well as renewables, and recognising that fossil fuels are going to be with us for a while until we find something that can provide long-duration backup for when the wind isn't blowing.
So where do you think the Conservatives have not quite got it right?
Well, there is a feeling that the current government is rather risk-averse, I suspect, and some might say rather cowardly on these issues. The previous Labour government dodged the issue about nuclear new build and, to Blair's credit, changed that position later on. I wonder if the Conservatives will regret not pushing for this now.
When I was at the Labour conference and the Tory conference, Labour MPs were coming up to you saying they couldn't believe their luck that fracking was back, because they said a lot of the fracking will take place in key Conservative marginals. And I suspect that's why Rishi Sunak's pulled back. Look at the polls, they're already 35 points behind in the polls. Do they really then want to have fracking, all the upheaval, all the damage it does to the local environment in key Conservative seats?
Well, even if the damage to the environment has been overstated, I think you're right about the politics. And let's face it, if this government really felt it was going to be in office in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, I suspect it might be taking a rather different decision. It's 20 or 30% behind in the polls. It doesn't need the aggro on its home territory at the moment, I think is the swift way of summarising what's going on.
I mean, ultimately, it was a manifesto pledge in 2019, so it was only briefly fracking back on the agenda for the length of Liz Truss's tenure.
Indeed, and one can argue whether she was or wasn't the best person to pursue that particular line. But I think it was right to review it because of the energy security situation we've got in Europe now, which was different at the time the manifesto was produced. And that said, there was wiggle room in the manifesto as well to review the seismic limits on fracking and so on in light of scientific evidence. So there was scope for the government to move there if they'd wanted to do so. Clearly they don't.
Well, how much is the price of gas now coming down on the wholesale markets? We keep reading that it is falling. When will that come into our gas bills?
Well, the good news, as you say, is it's been falling for some months now. The bad news is the price it has fallen too. If you look at the year-ahead market, which is what matters for your and my gas bills and for most businesses, it's still several times what it was 18 months, 2 years ago. So we're going to have to get used to high prices, but they might not be as expensive as feared, and the bailout that the government has put in place for domestic customers might prove to be less expensive. So there's good news on that front, but I think anyone who's expecting cheap energy, unfortunately, we're not going back to what we had a couple of years ago.